Did you know Elvis Presley has more number one albums on the UK charts than any other solo artist in history? More than Madonna. More than Bob Dylan. Did you know he has more certified gold and platinum albums than any artist in the history of music, period? The numbers are staggering, and they often get lost in the myth. People talk about the legend, the icon, the cultural force, but they forget about the data. The cold, hard numbers that sit in the record books. These numbers tell a story. It's a story of dominance that is hard to comprehend today. We live in an age of fragmented audiences and fleeting fame. An artist can be the biggest thing in the world for a year, then fade. Elvis was the biggest thing in the world for decades, and the charts prove it. This isn't about opinion. It's not about whether you like his music. This is about scientific analysis of the data. We are going to look at 15 specific chart metrics. Each one is a piece of evidence. Together, they build a case for a level of commercial supremacy that may never be seen again. Forget the hype. Let's look at the facts. Is the king of rock and roll still the king of the charts? The data has an answer. Number 15, what if we count all the charts? Most people think of the pop charts. The Billboard Hot 100, the main chart, and that makes sense. It's the one everyone follows. But in the 1950s, music wasn't one big pot. It was segregated. Billboard ran separate charts for different audiences. There was the main pop chart called the bestsellers in stores. There was the country and western chart. And there was the rhythm and blues chart. There were like three different worlds. An artist was typically successful in one. A country star stayed on the country chart. An R&B artist stayed on the R&B chart. They rarely crossed over. It was a reflection of a segregated America. The radio stations were segregated. The record stores were segregated. The charts simply reflected that reality. Then Elvis came along. He didn't just cross over. He kicked the doors down. He dominated all three charts at the same time. This wasn't just a minor achievement. It was a cultural earthquake, and you can see it in the data. The prime example is his first national single for RCA, Heartbreak Hotel. In 1956, Heartbreak Hotel went to number one on the Billboard Pop chart. It also went to number one on the Country and Western chart. And it went to number 5 on the Rhythm and Blues chart. No white artist had ever done this before on this scale. Pat Boone might cover an R&B song and have a pop hit, but he wasn't charting on the R&B chart itself. Elvis was. He was selling to the pop audience, the country audience, and the R&B audience simultaneously. This wasn't a fluke. Look at Hound Dog and Don't Be Cruel, the two-sided monster hit from later in 1956. Hound Dog hit number one on the pop, R&B, and country charts. Don't Be Cruel also hit number one on all three. He had 2 songs occupying the top spot on all major charts at once. This demonstrated a unique, universal appeal that defied the industry's neat little boxes. His music was a blend of influences. He sang country with the fervor of an R&B singer. He sang R&B with a touch of pop polish. The result was something new, something that everyone could connect with, regardless of their preferred radio station. The music historian Joel Whitburn, whose work compiling Billboard chart data is the foundation of modern music statistics, documented this phenomenon extensively. His books show, in stark black and white, how Elvis's name started appearing everywhere. He wasn't just a pop star, he was a music star. Full stop. This multi-chart dominance is perhaps the most scientific proof of his impact. It's a quantifiable measure of his ability to break down cultural barriers. In a fragmented market, he was a unifier. He forced the industry to see that audiences weren't as divided as they thought. The success was so immense that Billboard eventually created the Hot 100 in 1958, a consolidated chart that tried to capture an artist's popularity across all genres and formats. You could argue that Elvis's success is one of the reasons a unified chart like the Hot 100 became necessary in the first place. He broke the old system. So when we only talk about his pop chart numbers, we are only telling a third of the story. His dominance was wider and deeper than that. He wasn't just playing in one league. He was the champion of 3 leagues at the same time. But does this early data hide a darker truth? Was his success on the R&B charts a true reflection of acceptance, or a commercial appropriation that pushed original black artists aside? If we had modern granular sales data from 1956, would it show his records selling in predominantly white neighborhoods, just to people who also liked R&B? Or was he truly being bought in the heart of black communities? We can see the chart positions, but can we ever truly know the demographic breakdown of who was buying the records? Number 14, did Elvis own the whole top 10? Having a number one hit is impressive. Having multiple hits in the top 40 at the same time is a sign of a major star. But completely owning the top of the charts is a different level of dominance. It's about saturation. It means your music is so popular that there's barely room for anyone else. Elvis Presley achieved this kind of chart saturation to a degree that is difficult to match. Let's look at the data from a single week in 1956. For the week ending October 20th, Elvis had 2 records in the top 5 of the Billboard Bestsellers chart. Hound Dog, Don't Be Cruel was at number 2, after spending an incredible 11 weeks at number 1. And his new record, Love Me Tender, had just debuted at number 3. So he had 2 of the top 3 songs in the country. This alone is a major feat, but it gets more impressive. In December of 1956, he held the number 1 and number 4 spots with Love Me Tender and Don't Be Cruel, respectively. The Beatles are famous for their chart takeover in April 1964 when they held the top 5 spots on the Hot 100. That is an undisputed monumental achievement, but Elvis's brand of saturation was different. It was a sustained pressure over a longer period. Throughout 1956 and 1957, it was rare for a month to go by without Elvis having at least 2 songs in the top 20, often in the top 10. He was a constant presence. For example, in the fall of 1957, Jailhouse Rock was screaming up the charts while its B-side, Treat Me Nice, also charted high. At the same time, his previous hit, Let Me Be Your Teddy Bear, was still lingering in the top half of the chart. This phenomenon is documented in Peter Guralnick's definitive biography, Last Train to Memphis. He describes how RCA couldn't press the records fast enough. The demand was insatiable. Every new single became a national event. The data reflects this reality. When an artist occupies multiple high-ranking spots, it means they are dominating radio airplay, jukebox plays, and record sales simultaneously. They aren't just appealing to one group of fans with one song. They are capturing the entire public's attention with a wave of music. Think of it like a stock market index. An artist's chart presence is their market share of public consciousness. For much of the late 50s, Elvis's market share was enormous. He wasn't just competing with other artists. He was competing with himself. His new single had to fight for airplay with his last single. This saturation created a feedback loop. His constant presence on the radio and in jukeboxes made him seem bigger than life, which in turn drove more sales, which kept him on the charts. It was a cycle of pure dominance. While the Beatles had a more explosive, concentrated takeover, Elvis's was a grinding, long-term occupation of the top of the charts. But does this chart saturation tell the whole story, or does it point to a lack of competition? Was the music market of the late 1950s so underdeveloped that one superstar could dominate it more easily than today? Or did the power of a few key radio DJs and television appearances like his famous Ed Sullivan shows create an artificial bottleneck that funneled all attention to him? Is it possible that in today's hyper-competitive, multi-platform world, this kind of sustained saturation is mathematically impossible for anyone to achieve again? In number 13, how fast could he hit number 1? In the music industry, speed matters. How quickly a song climbs the charts is a key indicator of an artist's power. It shows pent-up demand. It shows that the audience was waiting for the new release and rushed out to buy it. This is called chart velocity. A song that slowly crawls to the top over several months is a sleeper hit. A song that explodes onto the chart and hits number 1 in a few weeks is a blockbuster. While Elvis's career was filled with blockbusters, let's analyze the chart runs of some of his biggest hits. Before Elvis, it was common for songs to take a long time to reach the top. The distribution networks were slower, promotion took time to build, but Elvis changed the expectations. Consider Love Me Tender from 1956. It entered the Billboard charts on October 20th. By November 3rd, just 2 weeks later, it was number 1. This was an incredible speed for the era. The song had been pre-ordered over 1 million times before it was even released, an industry first. This was a direct result of him performing the song on the Ed Sullivan Show in September. The television appearance created a massive, immediate demand that translated into one of the fastest climbs to number 1 the charts had ever seen. Or look at Jailhouse Rock in 1957, it entered the top 100 on October 14th. By November 4th, 3 weeks later, it was number one. A Fool Such as I in 1959 had a similarly rapid ascent. This wasn't just happening in the US. In the UK, where singles charts were well established, his velocity was even more stunning. Jailhouse Rock entered the UK charts on November 22nd, 1957, and was number one the very next week. In January 1959, his single One Night I Got Stung entered the UK charts at number one. This is known as a bullet entry. It was an extremely rare feat, demonstrating that the record sold more in its first week than any other record in the country. He would repeat this feat many times in the UK. This high chart velocity shows the power of his brand. By 1957, an Elvis single was a guaranteed event. Fans didn't need to hear it on the radio for weeks to decide if they liked it. They knew they wanted it. This is a level of trust and anticipation that few artists ever build. The record company RCA and his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, were masters at building this anticipation. They would announce a new Elvis single and the machine would go into motion. Radio stations would be primed, stores would place huge orders. The result was a sales explosion in the first week of release, which the charts directly reflected. This data point, chart velocity, is a scientific measure of an artist's immediate drawing power. It cuts through all the noise. It's a simple metric. How fast did you get to the top? For Elvis, the answer was consistently faster than almost anyone else. It demonstrated that his success wasn't accidental or a slow burn. It was a deliberate, powerful, and immediate commercial force. But is chart velocity a true measure of a song's quality or just a measure of marketing power? Did the massive pre-release hype from Colonel Parker's machinery create a self-fulfilling prophecy, where songs shot to number one before the public had even had a chance to absorb them? How many other, perhaps better, songs were suffocated by the sheer commercial force of an Elvis release, never getting the chance for their own slow climb? Does a fast rise to the top mean more than a song that stays on the chart for a year? Old number 12 did his success cross the ocean. For an American artist in the 1950s, success was usually domestic. The US market was the biggest in the world. International success was a nice bonus, but it wasn't the main goal. The logistics of global releases were complicated. But Elvis Presley wasn't just an American phenomenon, he was a global one. And the chart data from the United Kingdom provides a powerful case study of his international dominance. The UK music market has always been one of the most important in the world. The official charts company has been tracking single and album sales there for decades. Their data shows that Elvis's success in Britain was, in some ways, even more staggering than in his home country. He has had 21 number one singles in the UK. That is more than any other solo artist in UK chart history. The only act with more is the Beatles. Think about that. An American rock and roll singer from Mississippi is the most successful solo artist ever in the United Kingdom. His dominance wasn't just a 50s phenomenon either. It continued for his entire career. He had UK number ones in the 1950s, All Shook Up, Jailhouse Rock, the 1960s, It's Now or Never, Are You Lonesome Tonight, and the 1970s, The Wonder of You. But the most stunning part of his UK chart story happened after his death. In 2002, a remix of his song A Little Less Conversation by the Dutch DJ Junkie the 40th went to number one in the UK. This was 25 years after his death. Then, in 2005, RCA re-released 18 of his previous UK number one singles. 3 of them, Jailhouse Rock, One Night I Got Stung, and It's Now or Never, all went to number one on the singles chart again. This unprecedented event meant Elvis Presley was hitting number one with 50-year-old songs. It also gave him the record for the most number one hits on the UK charts, surpassing the Beatles for a time until they reclaimed the lead. This wasn't limited to the UK. He was a chart force across Europe, in Australia, and in Japan. His album Aloha from Hawaii via Satellite was a number one hit in countries all over the world in 1973. The data from international chart organizations like Germany's Media Control Charts or Australia's ARIA charts all tell the same story. His name is all over their historical records. This global success is a key piece of evidence. It proves that his appeal wasn't tied to a specific American culture or moment in time. The themes in his music, the power of his voice, and the charisma of his performances translated across languages and cultures. He never performed a single concert outside of North America, yet his records sold in the millions and topped the charts all over the globe. That is a demonstration of pure musical power, unassisted by the modern tools of global tours and promotion. The numbers don't lie. When you analyze the charts from a global perspective, his dominance only looks bigger. He wasn't just the king of rock and roll in America, he was one of the biggest recording artists the world had ever seen. But how much of his international success was due to his music, and how much was due to the exportation of American culture after World War II? Was he simply the most visible face of a new, exciting American wave that the world was eager to embrace? If he had been from, say, Germany or Italy, could he have achieved the same global impact? And what does it say that he could top charts worldwide without ever visiting those countries? Something that would be unthinkable for a major star today. Did his physical absence create a mystique that actually fueled his record sales? Number 11, was it just the 50s? There's a common misconception about Elvis. Many people picture the young, rebellious Elvis of the 1950s. They think of Hound Dog and the swiveling hips. They assume his career was all about that first explosion of rock and roll. The data, however, tells a very different story. Elvis's chart dominance was not confined to one decade. He was a consistent hit maker for over 20 years. Let's break down his career by decade, using the Billboard charts as our metric. In the 1950s, he was undeniably a phenomenon. From his first chart entry in 1956 to the end of 1959, he placed dozens of songs on the Hot 100, with 14 hitting number 1. This was his explosive first act. Anyone would be lucky to have a career like that. Then came the 1960s. After he returned from the army in 1960, many wondered if he could pick up where he left off. The music scene had changed. He answered with some of the biggest hits of his career. Stuck on You went straight to number 1 in 1960. It's Now or Never, a pop opera ballad, became one of his best-selling singles ever, also hitting number 1. He continued to have major top 10 hits throughout the early 60s with songs like Are You Lonesome Tonight? Number 1, Surrender number 1, and Good Luck Charm number 1. The mid-60s were dominated by his movie soundtracks, and while the quality of the songs is often debated, they still sold. He placed dozens of songs on the charts during this period, like Viva Las Vegas and Bossa Nova Baby. Then, at the end of the decade, after the '68 comeback special, he had another career renaissance with the number 3 smash, Suspicious Minds, in 1969. He had proven he could be a chart force in a decade dominated by the British invasion, Motown, and psychedelic rock. The 1970s arrived, and he was still a major presence. He kicked off the decade with The Wonder of You, a live recording that became a huge international hit. In 1972, he had a top 10 hit with Burning Love. His live album Aloha from Hawaii went to number 1 in 1973. He continued to chart with singles like My Boy and Promised Land right up until his death in 1977. His last major hit while he was alive, Way Down, was climbing the charts in the summer of 1977. He had number 1 hits in the 50s and 60s, and top 10 hits in the 70s. This longevity is rare. Music journalist and author Ken Barnes has studied chart history extensively. His work highlights how few artists from the 50s rock and roll era were able to maintain a significant chart presence into the 70s. Chuck Berry had a novelty hit, Jerry Lee Lewis returned to the country charts, but Elvis was still competing on the main pop charts. This sustained success across 3 decades is a scientific measure of his adaptability and enduring appeal. He wasn't a fad, he was a fixture, but does this longevity show true artistic evolution or a calculated effort to adapt to changing trends? Were his 60s ballads and 70s showstoppers a genuine reflection of his musical soul, or were they savvy commercial moves to stay relevant? How much of his later chart success was driven by new young fans versus the loyalty of his original 50s audience? Could he have maintained that chart presence into the 1980s if he had lived, or had his era finally truly passed? Number 10. Can a dead man top the charts? For most artists, death is the end of their chart career. There might be a brief surge in sales due to nostalgia, but then their music recedes into the oldies category. For Elvis Presley, death was just another career phase. His chart presence after August 16, 1977 is a remarkable phenomenon that provides another layer of evidence for his unique and enduring dominance. Immediately after his death, his sales exploded. His final single, Way Down, which had been stalled on the charts, shot to #1 in the UK and to the top 20 in the US. His albums flooded the album charts. This was expected, but what wasn't expected was that it would keep happening for decades. The key piece of evidence here is the 2002 Elvis 31 hits compilation. This wasn't just some repackaged oldies album, it was a global cultural event. The album went to #1 in the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, and many other countries. It sold over 10 million copies worldwide. This was 25 years after he died. He was outselling the top contemporary artists of the day. The album also spawned a massive new hit single. The Dutch DJ Junkie the 40th was commissioned to remix a relatively obscure 1968 Elvis track, A Little Less Conversation. The resulting track, Elvis vs. JXL, was a modern, danceable club banger. It went to #1 in over 20 countries, including the UK. A man who had been dead for a quarter of a century had a #1 dance hit around the world. This is a powerful data point. It showed that his voice, his recordings, and his persona were not just relics. They could be successfully recontextualized for a new generation. This wasn't a one-time event. His albums consistently re-enter the charts. Every major anniversary of his birth or death sees a surge in sales. In 2015 and 2016, the albums If I Can Dream and The Wonder of You, which paired his original vocal tracks with new orchestral arrangements by the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, were massive sellers. Both albums went to #1 in the UK, making him the solo artist with the most UK #1 albums. A new generation was discovering his music, not as an oldies act, but as a contemporary release. The recent Baz Luhrmann biopic Elvis in 2022 caused another massive surge, with his catalog streaming numbers skyrocketing and his music re-entering charts worldwide. The data from Nielsen SoundScan and later MRC data, which tracks music sales and streams, shows a consistent high baseline of consumption for Elvis's catalog year after year. He remains one of the most streamed artists from his era. This posthumous success is perhaps the ultimate testament to his dominance. It proves his music has a timeless quality that transcends his own life. The brand is so powerful that it can continue to generate #1 hits and sell millions of albums long after he is gone. No other solo artist from his era has had a comparable level of sustained, chart-topping, posthumous success. But where's the line between celebrating a legacy and exploiting a dead artist? Is the success of remixes and orchestral overdubs a testament to his original talent, or a sign that his raw recordings are no longer seen as commercially viable on their own? If Elvis were alive today, would he approve of these new versions of his work? And is it possible that this posthumous success is fueled more by the power of his brand and image than by the actual music itself? #9. What did the comeback special actually change? By 1968, Elvis Presley was seen by many as a fading star. He hadn't had a top 10 hit in 3 years. He was stuck in a rut of making mediocre Hollywood movies and recording their equally mediocre soundtracks. The music world had been turned upside down by the Beatles, Bob Dylan, and the psychedelic revolution. To the hip kids on the Sunset Strip, Elvis was a joke. He was their parents' music. Then, on December 3rd, 1968, he appeared in a television special on NBC called Singer Presents Elvis. It is now known simply as the '68 Comeback Special. This event provides a perfect before and after data set to scientifically measure his renewed chart power. Let's look at the before. His last top 10 hit had been Crying in the Chapel in 1965. The singles from his movies, like Long-Legged Girl with the Short Dress On, were barely scraping the bottom of the Hot 100. His album sales were respectable, but not spectacular. He was, from a chart perspective, becoming irrelevant. Now let's look at the after. The television special was a massive critical and commercial success. It showed a lean, hungry, and powerful Elvis dressed in black leather, singing his classic hits with a fire nobody had seen in years. It reminded the world who he was. The soundtrack album for the special shot into the top 10, his first in years. But the real impact came from what he did next. Re-energized, he went to Memphis and recorded at American Sound Studio with producer Chips Moman. This was the first time he had recorded in his hometown in 14 years. The songs from these sessions were a revelation. The first single released was In the Ghetto, a socially conscious song about poverty and crime. It was a radical departure for him. The song became a massive hit, reaching number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 in the summer of 1969. It was his first top 10 hit in over 4 years. The follow-up single was even bigger. Suspicious Minds was a powerhouse of a song, a perfect blend of rock, pop, and soul. In November 1969, it went to number 1. It was his first number 1 single in the United States in over 7 years. The album From These Sessions, From Elvis in Memphis, is considered by many critics, like those at Rolling Stone magazine, to be one of the greatest albums ever made. It was a top 20 hit and a massive seller. The data is clear and dramatic. The 68 comeback special was a catalyst. It directly led to a creative and commercial rebirth that put him right back at the top of the charts. You can draw a straight line from the TV special to the number 1 hit. It's a textbook case of how a single powerful performance can completely reverse an artist's career trajectory. He wasn't just a nostalgia act anymore. He was competing with and beating the top artists of the late 1960s. The charts provide the empirical evidence that the comeback was not just a critical success, but a massive commercial one as well. But was the comeback a genuine artistic rebirth, or was it a brilliantly executed marketing campaign orchestrated by Colonel Parker to relaunch a stalled career? If the TV special had failed, would Elvis have simply retired to Graceland, his career over? And how much of the success of In the Ghetto and Suspicious Minds was due to the quality of the songs themselves versus the public's renewed fascination with Elvis after seeing him on television? Could he have had those hits without the special? And number 8, how did a live satellite show chart globally? On January 14, 1973, Elvis Presley performed a concert at the Honolulu International Center. This was not just any concert, it was broadcast live via satellite to over 40 countries in Asia and Australia. It was shown on a delayed basis in Europe a few days later. In the United States, it was aired in April as a television special. The event was called Aloha from Hawaii via satellite. It was the first time a solo entertainer had held a live concert broadcast around the world. It was a massive technological and logistical undertaking and a huge gamble. The chart data shows just how massively that gamble paid off. RCA Records released a double album of the concert just weeks after the broadcast. The album, Aloha from Hawaii via satellite, was an instant blockbuster. It entered the Billboard album chart in February 1973. By May, it was the number 1 album in the United States. It knocked Pink Floyd's The Dark Side of the Moon out of the number 1 spot for a time. It became one of the best-selling albums of his career, eventually being certified 5x platinum by the RIAA. This wasn't just a US phenomenon. The album was a chart topper all over the world. It was a number 1 hit in Japan, where the satellite broadcast had been a major cultural event. It sold huge numbers across Europe and Australia. This global chart success is a unique data point. A typical live album is for the existing fan base, but Aloha from Hawaii was different. It was an event album. The global broadcast created a shared experience for hundreds of millions of people. The album was a souvenir of that event. It captured a moment in time. The success of this album is scientifically significant because it demonstrates a different kind of market power. This wasn't about a hit single driving album sales. The album had no new hit single on it. A collection of his classic songs and newer material. The success was driven entirely by the television special. It's a direct measure of his power as a live performer and a media personality. The data proves that by 1973, even without a current number 1 radio hit, the brand Elvis was powerful enough to create a number 1 album based on a single television event. In an era before MTV, before the internet, and before global album release strategies were common, Elvis and his team pulled off a global multimedia event, and the album charts around the world provide the hard evidence of its overwhelming success. But did the satellite special represent the peak of his artistic power, or the beginning of his transformation into a global brand, more icon than musician? This is how much of the album's success was driven by the novelty of the satellite broadcast itself, a technological marvel at the time. If that same concert had been released as a standard live album without the global television event, would it have even reached the top 10? Does the success of Aloha measure his musical relevance in 1973, or the world's fascination with an American spectacle? Number 7, was he a singles artist or an album artist? In music, there's often a distinction made between a singles artist and an album artist. A singles artist has big radio hits, but their albums might not sell as well. An album artist might not have many number one singles, but they build a loyal following that buys their albums. The Beatles and Pink Floyd are classic examples of album artists. So, where does Elvis fit? Was he a master of the 3-minute single, or could he sell the long-playing album? The chart data shows that he was unequivocally both, and his dominance in both formats is another key piece of scientific evidence. Let's start with the singles. As we've discussed, his record here is monumental. According to Billboard, he has 18 number one hits on the Hot 100. That's more than any other solo artist. He has 38 top 10 hits. He has 114 songs that made the top 40. These numbers, compiled by chart historians like Joel Whitburn, place him in the absolute top tier of singles artists. For the first part of his career, the single was the primary format for rock and roll, and he was the king of the single. But what about albums? This is where his dominance becomes even clearer, especially when compared to his 1950s peers. And Elvis was one of the first rock and roll artists to treat the album as a serious artistic and commercial statement. His debut album, Elvis Presley, released in March 1956, went straight to number one on the Billboard album chart. It was the first rock and roll album in history to do so. This was a game changer. It proved that the teenage audience, which had previously only bought singles, was willing to buy a full album. His album chart record is simply incredible. He has had 10 number one albums on the Billboard 200 chart. This is the third most for any artist, behind only the Beatles and Jay-Z. He has more number one albums than the Rolling Stones, Bruce Springsteen, or Michael Jackson. But the true measure of his album's success lies in the certifications from the Recording Industry Association of America, RIA. The RIA awards gold 500,000 units, platinum 1 million units, and diamond 10 million units status to albums. According to the RIA's official totals, Elvis Presley has more gold albums than any other artist in history, with 101. He has more platinum albums than any other artist, with 57. He has more multi-platinum albums than any other artist. In total, he has more certified album awards from the RIA than anyone. This data is crucial. Singles can be fads. An album represents a deeper commitment from the listener. It requires more of their time and money. The fact that Elvis sold tens of millions of albums, decade after decade, proves that he had a deep and lasting connection with his audience. He wasn't just a jukebox hero. He was an artist whose body of work people wanted to own. The data from both the Billboard album charts and the RIA certifications provides a clear, two-pronged conclusion. He dominated both the primary musical formats of his time. But do the high sales numbers of his movie soundtrack albums in the 1960s skew the data? Are we counting albums that sold based on the popularity of a film rather than their own musical merit? If you remove the 15-plus soundtrack albums from his discography, how would his overall album sales numbers compare to artists like the Beatles, who focused almost exclusively on non-soundtrack studio albums? Does the sheer volume of his album releases, often 2 or 3 a year, inflate his certification numbers compared to artists who released an album only every few years? Number 6, who really has the most gold records? Numbers can be confusing. You hear claims about who has sold the most records, and the figures often seem to conflict. This is because there are different ways to measure success. There are claimed sales, which are often inflated by record companies. And then there are certified sales, which are audited and verified by an official body. In the United States, that body is the RIA, the Recording Industry Association of America. For a scientific analysis of an artist's commercial dominance, RIA certifications are the gold standard. They are the closest thing we have to objective, verifiable fact. When you look at the RIA's official data, Elvis Presley's dominance is absolute and undeniable. The RIA has a ranking of the top-selling artists of all time based on certified album sales in the US. And Elvis is number 2 on that list, behind only the Beatles with 146.5 million certified album units sold. This alone puts him in rarefied air, but the story gets bigger when you look at the total number of awards. The RIA gives out awards for singles, albums, and EPs. A gold award signifies 500,000 units sold. A platinum award signifies 1 million units sold. When you count the total number of gold and platinum awards an artist has received across all formats, Elvis Presley is number one. And it's not even close. As of the latest Riyadh data, Elvis has a total of 199 gold, platinum, and multi-platinum awards. The Beatles are a distant second. This total includes his 101 gold albums, 57 platinum albums, and numerous awards for his singles. This data is critically important. It's not based on speculation or old press releases. It's based on audits requested by the record company and certified by an independent organization. These numbers represent actual verified sales over a period of more than 60 years. His first gold record was for Heartbreak Hotel in 1956. His most recent certifications have come in the 21st century for albums released decades ago that continue to sell. Why is this a better measure than just looking at the number one spot on the charts? Because chart positions can be fleeting. A song can hit number one with relatively low sales if it's a slow week. The Riyadh certifications represent a huge volume of sales over time. To get a gold album, you have to convince 500,000 people to buy your record. To do that over 100 times, as Elvis has, is a level of commercial consistency that is almost beyond comprehension. It shows that nearly every project he released was a major commercial success. It wasn't just a few big hits carrying his career. It was a deep catalog of work that people bought in huge numbers. This is perhaps the most powerful statistical evidence of his sustained dominance in the American music market. But does the Riyadh's changing methodology over the years affect the results? For example, they now include streaming equivalents in their album certifications, a standard that didn't exist for Elvis's entire career. Are we comparing apples and oranges when we look at his totals versus a modern artist like Drake, whose numbers are heavily boosted by streams? And how many millions of records did Elvis sell before the Riyadh even began certifying gold records in 1958? Is it possible that his actual sales are far higher than even these incredible certified numbers suggest? Number 5, how long did he stay on top? Having a number one hit is one thing. Staying at number one is another. The total number of weeks an artist has spent at the top of the charts is a powerful metric. It measures not just the peak of their popularity, but its duration. It answers the question, when you were the biggest star, how long did you hold the throne? When we analyze this data for Elvis Presley, we find a record of sustained chart-topping power that set the standard for generations to come. Let's look at the Billboard singles charts. Elvis Presley has spent a combined total of 79 weeks at the number one position. This is more than any other artist in the history of the chart. Mariah Carey is second, with 93 weeks, but her career started much later in a different chart era. Among his contemporaries and rock era pioneers, no one comes close. The Beatles are the nearest, with 59 weeks. The 79-week figure is a staggering number. It means that for a total of more than a year and a half, an Elvis Presley song was the number one single in the United States. This dominance was particularly concentrated in the early part of his career. In the calendar year 1956 alone, Elvis was at number one for a combined 25 weeks. That means for nearly half the year, he had the top song in the country. This was achieved with 3 different singles: Heartbreak Hotel, Don't Be Cruel, Hound Dog, and Love Me Tender. The dual-sided hit, Don't Be Cruel, Hound Dog, spent 11 weeks at number one by itself. This was a record for the rock era that stood for 36 years until it was broken by Boyz II Men's End of the Road in 1992. This wasn't just about 1 or 2 long-running hits. It was about a succession of them. As soon as one hit started to fall from the top spot, another was there to take its place. This sustained occupation of the number one position had a profound effect on the music industry. The ability about his success, it also meant he was a constant, unavoidable presence on the radio, in jukeboxes, and in the minds of the public. The data for total weeks at number one is a more nuanced and powerful metric than just counting the number of chart toppers. An artist could have 10 number one hits that each only stay on top for a week. That's 10 weeks in total. Another artist could have 5 number one hits that each stay on top for 4 weeks. That's 20 weeks in total. The second artist has demonstrated a deeper, more resonant connection with the audience. Their songs have more staying power. Elvis is 79 weeks at the top. An average of over 4 weeks for each of his number one singles proves that his hits weren't just flashes in the pan. They were cultural events that dominated the charts for long periods, but is the weeks at number one metric a fair comparison across different eras of music? The chart turnover rate was much slower in the 1950s than it is in the modern streaming era, where songs can debut at number one and fall off quickly. Does this give older artists like Elvis an unfair advantage in this specific statistic? If we were to normalize the data to account for the average chart speed of each decade, would his records still be as dominant? And how much did the practice of releasing two-sided hits, where both songs were promoted, contribute to the long chart runs of singles like Don't Be Cruel, Hound Dog? Number 4, did he just have a few big hits? You know, when we think of legendary artists, we often remember their biggest, most iconic songs. For Elvis, that might be Jailhouse Rock, Suspicious Minds, or Can't Help Falling in Love. But a true measure of chart dominance isn't just about the peaks, it's also about the breadth and consistency of an artist's output. How many songs did they get onto the charts in total? This metric, the total number of entries on the Billboard Hot 100, shows the sheer volume of an artist's success. On this count, Elvis Presley is in a league of his own. According to the official statistics kept by Billboard magazine, Elvis Presley has had 109 songs enter the Hot 100 chart. This is a staggering number. For perspective, the Beatles had 71 entries. Michael Jackson had 51. This statistic is a testament to the incredible productivity and consistent popularity of Elvis throughout his career. From 1956 until his death, and even posthumously, he was a constant presence on the American pop charts. Let's break that number down further. Of those 109 entries, 38 of them reached the top 10. Again, this is a record for a solo artist that stood for decades. This shows that a significant percentage of his releases were not just minor hits, but major ones. It demonstrates a remarkable quality control and an unerring sense of what the public wanted to hear. The ability to repeatedly crack the top 10, the most competitive real estate on the chart, over a period of 20 years is a feat of incredible consistency. This data is crucial because it refutes the idea that Elvis was just an artist with a few lucky, massive hits. His career was a relentless barrage of successful singles. Even the songs that weren't number one hits were still huge successes. Songs like Viva Las Vegas, Blue Suede Shoes, his version, and Return to Sender are iconic, beloved classics. None of them hit number one on the Hot 100, but they were all massive top 10 or top 20 hits that contributed to his constant presence on the radio and in the culture. This metric of total chart entries is a scientific measure of an artist's footprint. Each chart entry represents a song that was popular enough to receive significant airplay and sales across the country. To have over 100 such songs is to have created a body of work that is deeply woven into the fabric of popular music. It means that at almost any point during his active career, you could turn on the radio and hear a current Elvis Presley hit. This saturation, the sheer volume of success, is a form of dominance that is often overlooked, but is powerfully demonstrated by the raw data of the Billboard charts. But does the sheer volume of releases from his movie era, where RCA was contractually obligated to release singles from every film, artificially inflate his total number of chart entries? How many of those 109 songs were truly a list, singles versus minor B-sides or soundtrack cuts that charted low for only a week or two? If we were to only count songs that reached the top 40, a common measure of a real hit, how would his total compare to other artists like Madonna or Stevie Wonder, who had a very high percentage of their releases become major hits? Number 3, how does he measure up to the Beatles? In any discussion of chart dominance, there are two names that inevitably come up: Elvis Presley and the Beatles. They are the two towering commercial titans of popular music. Comparing them is difficult. They were from different eras with different career lengths and different approaches to making music. But the chart data allows for a fascinating and surprisingly objective head-to-head comparison. Let's look at the key metrics on the US Billboard charts. For number 1 singles, the Beatles hold the record with 20. And Elvis is the top solo artist with 18. Advantage Beatles. For total weeks at number 1, Elvis holds the record with 79 weeks. The Beatles are second with 59 weeks. Advantage Elvis. For total top 10 hits, Elvis had 38. The Beatles had 34. Advantage Elvis. For total entries on the Hot 100, Elvis had 109. The Beatles had 71. Advantage Elvis. Now let's turn to the album charts. For number 1 albums, the Beatles have the all-time record with 19. Elvis is third with 10. Advantage Beatles. According to the RIA, the Beatles are the top-selling artist of all time in the US with 183 million certified units. Elvis is second with 146.5 million. Advantage Beatles. However, when it comes to the total number of gold and platinum album awards, Elvis is number one, with significantly more individual album certifications than the Beatles. This reflects his much larger catalog of releases over a longer career. Advantage Elvis. What does this data tell us? It paints a picture of two different kinds of dominance. The Beatles' success was arguably more concentrated and explosive. In their relatively short career from 1964 to 1970, they dominated the charts in a way that had never been seen before, famously holding the top 5 spots on the Hot 100 in April 1964. Their ratio of hits to releases was incredibly high. Their album sales on a per-album basis are unmatched. Elvis's dominance was about sustained, long-term supremacy. His chart reign lasted more than twice as long as the Beatles did. He consistently produced hits for over 20 years. His total number of hit songs and the total time he spent at the top of the charts are greater. His catalog is larger and has generated more individual RIA awards. It was a marathon, not a sprint. So who was more dominant? The data suggests there's no single answer. The Beatles had a higher peak, and Elvis had greater longevity and a wider overall footprint on the charts, but the very fact that Elvis, a solo artist who started a decade earlier, can be statistically compared to the biggest band in history and win in several key categories is perhaps the most powerful evidence of his singular dominance. He set the bar, and only a phenomenon as massive as the Beatles could even come close to reaching it. But is a direct statistical comparison fair when their active careers barely overlapped? The Beatles benefited from the global music market that Elvis helped create. Elvis's career was interrupted for 2 years by his army service, a momentum killer. The Beatles never had to face. How would Elvis's numbers look if he hadn't spent the mid-60s focused on movie soundtracks while the Beatles were revolutionizing the studio album? Conversely, how would the Beatles' numbers look if they had stayed together for 20 years? Is this comparison ultimately a statistical parlor game? Or does it reveal a fundamental truth about two different models of superstardom? Number 2, what is the true number of number ones? It sounds like a simple question. How many number one hits did Elvis have? The commonly cited number is 18. That number comes from Billboard's main pop chart, the Hot 100, and its predecessors. But as we've already touched on, the story of the charts is more complicated than that. To truly understand the science of Elvis's dominance, we have to look at how a number one hit was defined and counted during his career. And when we do that, his total gets even bigger. Before the creation of the Hot 100 in August 1958, Billboard had multiple singles charts running simultaneously. There was the best sellers in stores chart based on record sales. There was the most played by jockeys chart based on radio airplay. And there was the most played in jukeboxes chart. A song could be number one on one chart, but not the others. Most chart historians, like Joel Whitburn, use the best sellers chart as the definitive one for the pre-Hot 100 era. This is where the 18 number ones figure comes from. However, if you count a song as a number one hit, if it reached the top of any of those 3 charts, Elvis's total increases. For example, I Want You, I Need You, I Love You hit number 1 on the best sellers chart, but also on the jockeys chart. But a song like Too Much hit number 1 on the best sellers chart, while its flip side, Playing for Keeps, was a massive airplay and jukebox hit on its own. The chart data from this era is complex. The most conservative and widely accepted number is 18. But let's add another layer. Let's include the other major music trade publications of the day, Cashbox and Record World. They compiled their own charts based on their own data. They were serious competitors to Billboard. On the Cashbox charts, Elvis had 24 number one hits. Songs like Blue Suede Shoes and Return to Sender, which just missed the top spot on Billboard, were number one hits in Cashbox. This isn't just a statistical quirk. It means that according to another major legitimate measure of popularity at the time, he was even more successful. This isn't an attempt to, inflate the numbers. It's an effort to understand the full picture. The data from Billboard, Cashbox, and the R&B and country charts all point to the same conclusion. His success was so immense that it topped multiple charts compiled by multiple organizations across multiple genres. So while the official number might be 18, the scientific reality is that his number of chart-topping hits was likely much higher in the eyes of the public and the industry at the time. He didn't just top one chart, he dominated the entire chart ecosystem. The number 18 is an amazing achievement. But the truth of his dominance is even bigger than that number suggests. But in our data-driven age, which number should history recognize as the official one? Is it intellectually dishonest to pick and choose data from different charts to make an artist look better? Or is it more dishonest to rely on a single chart from a single publication as the sole arbiter of success, ignoring the wider context of the time? If we accept the Cashbox chart numbers for Elvis, do we then have to recalculate the hit totals for every other artist from that era as well, potentially rewriting music history? What is the true objective definition of a number one hit? Number one, can anyone ever match his record sales? This is the ultimate question. It's the one that sits at the top of the mountain. Who is the best-selling musical artist of all time? Answering this is notoriously difficult. Sales data from the early days of rock and roll is often incomplete. Global record keeping was inconsistent. But if we assemble all the available evidence, the RIA certifications, the international chart data, the credible estimates from biographers and record labels, a clear picture emerges. The Guinness Book of World Records, for decades, has recognized Elvis Presley as the best-selling solo artist in the history of music. The estimates of his total worldwide sales range from a conservative 600 million units to over 1 billion. His estate, Elvis Presley Enterprises, confidently uses the 1 billion figure. While it's impossible to verify this number with 100% scientific accuracy, let's look at the data we do have. We have the RIA certification of 146.5 million album sales in the US. We know he has sold at least 50 million certified singles in the US as well. That puts his verified US total at close to 200 million units. We know he was a monster seller in the UK with more number one albums than any other solo artist. We know he had massive sales across Europe, Asia, and Australia. When you begin to add up the credible sales data from all these major international markets, the numbers climb into the hundreds of millions very quickly. Ernst Jorgensen, a respected producer and archivist who has worked on Elvis's catalog for decades, detailed the sales history in his book Elvis Presley, A Life in Music. His research, based on internal RCA documents, supports the massive sales figures. He documents how singles would routinely sell millions of copies worldwide in a matter of weeks. The global success of albums like Aloha from Hawaii and the LV1S 31 Hits compilation added tens of millions to his total long after his career was thought to be over. So why is this record of sales the ultimate proof of his dominance? Because a sale is the most direct, democratic, and scientific measure of popularity. A chart position can be influenced by many factors. A critic's review is an opinion, but a sale is a transaction. It's a person putting down their hard-earned money to own a piece of your music. To do that hundreds of millions of times across dozens of countries over a span of more than 60 years is the ultimate testament. It means you have connected with more human beings on a commercial level than any other solo performer. Can anyone ever match it? It seems unlikely. The music industry has changed. The album is no longer the dominant format. Sales are fragmented across dozens of streaming platforms. It's hard to imagine a single artist ever again achieving the kind of focused, global, unit-shifting dominance that Elvis Presley did. The data we have, while imperfect, all points to the same conclusion. He was, and likely will remain, the biggest-selling solo musician that has ever lived. The numbers are the final and most powerful piece of evidence. But in the age of streaming, what does best-selling even mean anymore? Is one paid download equivalent to one vinyl album sale? How many Spotify streams equal the purchase of a CD? The entire economic and statistical model of the music industry has been upended. Is it possible that a modern artist like Taylor Swift or Drake, with their trillions of streams, has already surpassed Elvis in terms of total music consumption, even if their pure sales numbers are lower? Are we holding on to an outdated metric from a bygone era? And in doing so, are we failing to recognize the true nature of dominance in the 21st century? Will we ever be able to create a fair, unified metric to compare the commercial success of artists across all of music history?